Oh, yes. People who talk to animals. You remember the book Papa Hemingway? Maybe some of you read it. It's Hemingway's friend or biographer wrote it, and he has a marvelous discussion in one of the places about Hemingway, who had a gold pass given him by one of the Ringling brothers, so that he could always go below in Madison Square Garden when the circus was in New York to talk or to do anything he wanted to do with the animals. And there's a description of how he went down, and there was a particularly obnoxious gorilla who had a rather unhappy spirit. And when Hemingway said, well, it's been a long time since I taught gorilla talk, but I'd like to go, and the keeper thought that he was out of his mind, and he went over and began doing something, making these guttural sounds, and I imagine they were guttural sounds, but after a few minutes, the gorilla stopped whatever he was doing and stood on his haunches and took his bowl of bananas and put over his head to express extreme ecstasy. Well, I won't say what the keeper of the gorilla said when he saw it. Then he passed by the polar bear cage, and he said, well, this is a brand new experience, but I think I can do it. And he had conversation with the polar bear, and the polar bear was so excited that he got up and walked over to the wall and began rubbing his back against it, which was another way of getting the kind of an expression of the kind of bliss that he experienced from hearing Hemingway do this. There are various accounts of this sort that sound perhaps specious to us, but there is a rather detailed account of an Italian doctor who spent a great deal of time going through various parts of West Africa, where he was serving the Italian government as a physician. And he had heard that there was a Catholic priest who operated an orphanage, who by reputation once a year had a meeting with warthogs. And he didn't believe this, but he arrived at the proper time, and the Catholic priest took him out into the woods on a moonlit night, and there was a clearing, and the priest sat there in prayer, and the warthogs began to come out of the shadows, and they gathered in this opening, and the priest continued praying, and then when he had finished, he addressed them, and he said, you know that the children in the orphanage are dependent upon the crop. There is no other food, and if you eat the crop, they will starve to death. And I'm sure you do not want to do that. And there were some more words, I've forgotten what they were now. And then he had another prayer. And the warthogs disappeared, and the crop was saved. Now, all of this sounds very ridiculous, perhaps. But the point that I'm making is that all manifestations of life are rooted in a common ground. This is a point. And that all forms of life are manifestations of this. And to be repetitive, the marked difference between manifestations is the form of the manifestation, is the context, not the ground. And self-consciousness, inherent in its very nature, is paradoxical, because in self-consciousness I see myself as standing over against the ground of my being. I see myself as being a separate entity, separately contained, independent. And much of the journey, the pilgrimage of self-consciousness in human beings is to try to find their way back to the ground. To re-relate themselves to the ground out of which they come. Now, interestingly enough, very often, people who are less sophisticated, who are simple, seem to be closer to the awareness of this ground than others. And an illustration of this from my own childhood that I've written somewhere, but I went across the meadow to visit with my buddy. I was about 9, 10, somewhere in that awkward period. And when I came into the yard, his father rapped on the window pane, telling me to come around and come through the front door. And when I came into the room where he was, he pointed into the backyard, and there, Pierce, that was my buddy's name, his little sister, about 4 months old, was sitting in the sand, this is in Florida, sitting in the sand playing with this rattlesnake. And she'd pull him by the tail as he was trying to crawl away. She'd turn him over on his back, and she would giggle. And they were having a very interesting, intimate experience of fellowship and community. Pierce was stationed on one side of the house, of the house, and I was stationed on the other side. Why? So that no one would come around and introduce a divisive principle in the harmony. For as soon as that happened, there would be violence, there would be death. Now, this quality of man, the time binder, is one of the most important aspects of personality for the claims and the insights of religion. For it indicates that man has, to use a good term from social psychology at any rate, man is born with an ancient memory of a time when there was harmony, among all living things. I'm taking much time to lay the foundation for this because it will help us in our understanding of what the claim is that the mystic makes. This is why I'm doing it, so you see the relevancy of it. There seems to be an ancient memory of the race that goes back to forms that are expressed in myths, for instance, like the creation myths. Some years ago, I had an occasion to study creation myths in great depth. And one of the things that I discovered, that it didn't matter from what part of the world you examine the myth, the essential elements are always there, whether you begin with the creation account in our book, as found in Genesis, or you wander all over the story of man on the planet. Wherever he raises the question, where did we come from? How did the world get going? The fundamental insight in the answer is always the same. And what is that? That when forms of life were created, it didn't matter how varied the forms or the manifestations were. When forms of life were created, they had one thing in common. They felt that they were all a part of each other. So that animals and men talked with each other. And then the harmony was broken. Now this is the story. And the curiously interesting thing to me is that when men begin to dream about life at its best, that we call utopias. And you can pick any one of 100 or 150 different utopias. Plato's Republic, More's Utopia, any, you can run the gamut. The thing that all of them have in common is that within the context of the utopian city, there is this harmony, this community. Now, when we read it, then, among the poets, and I wanted to take 2 or 3 excerpts here, and we are tempted to say that this is just poetry with a little flip to the accent. I'm reminding you that what they're saying is a poetic way of expressing this basic proposition on which we have been working these 2 days. Now, a few lines from Alexander Pope, for instance. All are but parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and God the soul, that changed through all and yet in all the same, great in the earth as in the ethereal frame, warms in the sun, refreshes in the breeze, glows in the stars and blossoms in the trees, lives through all life, extends through all extent, spreads undivided, operates unspent, and so forth. Another, you're familiar with this, and I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. And then you recognize this from Shelley. He is made one with nature. There is heard his voice in all her music. From the moan of thunder to the song of night's sweet bird, he is a presence to be felt and known in darkness and in light, from herb and stone, spreading itself where'er that power may move which has withdrawn his being to its own, which wields the world with never wearied love, sustains it from beneath the ground, and kindles it above. He is a portion of the loveliness which once he made more lovely, and so forth. And then this from Tennyson: flower in the crannied wall, I pluck you out of the crannies, hold you here, root and all, in my hands, little flower. But if I could understand what you are, root and all in all, I should know what God and man is. And then from Paracelsus, truth is within ourselves. That's another way of saying this. It takes no rise from outward things, whatever you may believe. There is an inmost center in us all where truth abides in fullness. And around, wall upon wall, the gross flesh hems it in, this perfect, clear perception which is truth. A baffling and perverting carnal mesh binds it and makes all error. And to know rather consists in opening out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape, than in effecting entry for a life supposed to be without, and so forth and so on. It goes. Now, this is the summary. But there is inherent in the notion that this is a living universe, that life is alive. And that every manifestation of life is grounded in the aliveness of life. And therefore, no manifestation of life at last has an independent, separate existence from the ground of life. And because life is alive, therefore life cannot die. And perhaps life cannot die because life feeds on itself. Maybe that's why it can't die. And the metaphysical or the theological doctrine that takes the form of the notion of life eternal, I think, is rooted grossly in the sense of unrefined, not in the sense of vulgar. It is rooted grossly in the fact that life lives on itself. That life consumes life. And it's an endless cycle. Men die, you die, I die, men die. But life keeps coming on. And the thing that has harassed and bedeviled the mind of men as far as any memory goes is how may I consciously and deliberately participate in this ground? How can I experience at all the levels of my being this timeless ground in which my life is rooted? If I can do that, then there opens up to my mind the secret of life. Now the mystic makes no, let's say this, the mystic makes no outlandish claim. The only thing that he insists upon is that he experiences this awareness. And in this sense, there is a mystic element in all religious experience. I'm changing my move to the next segment in our discussion. There is a mystic element in all religious experience because central to religious experience is the sense or the awareness on the part of the experiencer that he is in touch with that which to him is ultimate. Now there's a medley of confusion about what the claim of the mystic is. It would be a very interesting thing if we had the time and the courage to go around the room and ask each one of you what is your idea of a mystic? It'd be very illuminating to us and to you also. I remember going to an assembly of students once, and I got in the afternoon. I was doing my talk in the evening, and on some aspect of this whole problem that we're considering here. And I happened to go into the men's room, and there were two young fellows in there, and they didn't know who I was, and didn't care for that matter, I suppose, but they said, who is this guy that's coming in from so-and-so and so who's supposed to speak tonight? I don't know, never heard of him. What's he going to talk about? And one fellow said, well, I think that it's something about taking rabbits out of a hat. And this is literally true. And the other fellow said, well, I wouldn't miss it. In the first place, mysticism is thought of as being pathological. Some queer and curious aberration of mind generated by emotional instability. Loeber, in his book on the psychology of mysticism, which you ought to read sometimes if we were going for a year rather than 3 weeks, it'd be interesting to take some time and work at it. But his whole point is the pathology of this curious kind of religious experience. It is obvious that I do not subscribe to this. The claim of the mystic is that he is in primary touch or contact with ultimate reality, which for the most part he labeled God. this claim has two rather curious elements inherent in it. One, that it is given, the experience is given. That by given I mean that it is a part of the givenness of his life. It isn't something that he achieves. It isn't something that he rests from the stubborn and unyielding and recalcitrant hands of a determined universe. No, nothing like that. But the first claim is that this is a part of the given, a part of that which is essentially him. And in that sense, it is without merit or demerit. In that sense, it is a grace. Now, there are many mystics who do not go along with this, but in essence, this is one of the first claims, that this quality of experiencing the ultimate is inherent in the very ground of his being. Another way of saying it, that for him it is a part of the givenness of God in him. And in this sense, he makes no exclusive claim to it. For it meaning the sense of the ultimate. It is a part of the givenness of the Creator to his creation. Now, the religious theory for the Christian mystic, and I'll say something about the others at a later point. But the religious theory, basic to the mystic's claim, is as follows. God is the creator of life. And more importantly, God is the creator of the living substance, that out of which particular expressions of life emerge, for instance, themselves. It is, in a sense, what I've been calling the ground all along, that God is not merely the creator of life, but the creator of the living substance, the life stuff, that, for instances itself in form, shape, characterization, classification. But these are phenomenological. They are not inherent. Now, another way of saying that is that God has not left himself without specific witness in the totality of his creation. Now any religion, well, I said it's any good religion, but any religion can accept the general proposition that God has not left himself without witness in his creation, his signature, the thing we've been talking about, reading here and talking about. Now, generally, the Christian draws a line there. The Christian can accept this fact that God has not left himself without a witness in his creation. But what the Christian is unwilling to accept is that God has not left himself without specific witness in all of his creation. And this opens up a whole area. I simply call your attention to it. Then, the religious theory in the first place says that God is the creator of life and the living substance. That out of which all concretions emerge, that out of which all particulars come, all the for instances, all the this and thatness emerge. But it goes further. It says that God is the creator of existence. Now this boggles the mind. I'm not sure. I am not sure. Or I'm not sure. Or I am not sure. That the mind can grasp this. Now what it says, you see, is that God bottoms existence. You know? That there is no thing, no particular, no manifestation, no anything that is outside of the sweep of the divine context. Now you can see the kind of moral problems that creates at once. I don't know why this popped into my mind, but it's too good for me to keep. It's just good to break the tension. A friend of mine sent me a clipping a couple of years ago, and it was about a mother and her little girl. And the little girl kept harassing her mother, as only little girls know how to do. And finally the mother said, now, if you don't stop doing this, when you die, you will not go to heaven. And she said, oh, yes, I will. She said, I will go right up there where God is, and I'll go in and out of the room, in and out of the room. And finally, in disgust, he would say, either come in or go out, and I'll come in. Now, the notion that God bottoms existence implies, you see, that there is not, nor can there be anything, underscore that, outside of the divine context. That has startling, baffling, moral problems. Moral problems. Name one of them, quickly. Can you? Yes, I suppose so. Yes, I guess that's right. Because the mind cannot conceive of a beginning. The mind can only conceive of beginnings. What other kind of problem it creates?
What does it say for hell?
I'm sorry.
What does it say for belief in hell?
Yeah, evil. Yeah. You see, the logic of this is that the contradictions of life can never be final or ultimate. That all contradictions then are limited. All dualisms are temporary. Think what that means in terms of the simple problem of human beings. Everybody in this room has been in situations in which the contradictions with which he was wrestling or she was wrestling seemed ultimate, seemed to be final, without solution. Even in the book, where there is an emphasis upon what seems to be an ultimate dualism between heaven and hell, for instance. What does the book finally say about this? There shall come a time when God will be all and in all. It's a daring thing that the contradictions of life, that the dualisms of life exhaust themselves. They run out. Now this is the basic religious theory upon which particularly the Christian mystic rests his, I started to say rests his case, but he's not under judgment, but he does whatever he does with it. That God is the creator of life and the living substance. That's the joker. The creation of the forms of life, and that out of which the forms emerge. God is the creator of existence, so that there is no thing that is outside of the divine context. So when the mystic then goes down this way, and comes up inside of the form out there. What he's saying is that there is no expression of life that, or manifestation of life, that is not funtally and fundamentally centered in the creativity of God. And you can see why they cause so much trouble in the church. Well, 3 minutes of 5, let's quit. Now, I didn't ask you whether you had anything to ask me. I'll start, I promise you, tomorrow morning, yes.
I went to the bookstore and they didn't have the books.
Oh, yes,